Well, a Milwaukee family is grieving tonight in honoring the life of 20-year-old Kanye Brunson. 1 year ago today, her body was discovered near Keefe Avenue and Palmer Street.
Imagine a young woman whose laughter could brighten the darkest day. Someone who could walk into a room and without even trying, lift the mood of everyone inside. That was Kanye Brunson. To her family, she wasn't just a daughter or a sister. She was their anchor, their joy, their source of inspiration. Kanye was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and from the very beginning, her loved ones saw a spark in her. She wasn't the type of person to fade quietly into the background. She was vibrant, magnetic, the kind of young woman people remembered long after meeting her. Friends described her as genuine and generous, the kind of person who could make you smile even when life was heavy. Her family, especially her mother, often called her the light of the house. To her mom, Jennifer, Kanye was more than just a child. She was a confidant and a best friend. They shared laughs, inside jokes, and little everyday moments that made their bond unshakable. Her stepfather remembered the way she could turn even the hardest days around with a quick joke or a playful grin. Her father spoke proudly of her drive, her determination to make something of herself. And her grandmother often said she had a presence you couldn't forget. Something about her energy lingered with you long after she left. But Kanye wasn't just loved for her personality. She had ambition too. She wanted to help people, to make the world around her better. At first, she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian because she adored animals. Then she considered orthodontics, drawn to the idea of giving people more confidence in their smiles. Later, her goals shifted again, this time toward nursing. She wanted to become a certified nursing assistant, a role where compassion and care meet responsibility. Helping others was at the core of who she was. And then there was her creative side. Kanye had a gift for beauty, for making people feel confident in their own skin. She loved styling hair, doing makeup, and sharing tips with her friends. It wasn't unusual for her to be the one helping others with their eyebrows, showing them how to put on eyelashes, or fixing up their look before a night out. She had a natural talent, and it pushed her to enroll in beauty school. To her, it wasn't just about outer appearance. It was about helping others see their own worth, their own light, just like she saw it. At only 20 years old, her future was wide open. She stood on the threshold of adulthood, with every path still in front of her. Her family believed she was destined for something special, because how could someone so full of life, so determined, not go far? She was chasing her dreams, balancing her ambitions with the joy of simply being young, laughing with her friends, and making plans for the future. But behind the smiles, behind the achievements, there was something Kanye carried quietly, something she didn't tell everyone. Because for all the promise her life held, there was also a secret, one that very few people knew about. And as much as her family adored her, they couldn't see the shadow that was creeping closer. This is where her story begins. Not just with the tragedy that made headlines, but with the love, laughter, and dreams that defined her before everything went wrong. Because to understand the horror of what happened to Kanye, you first need to understand who she was and why her life mattered so deeply. But soon, the secret relationship she had been hiding would come to light. A relationship that would shatter the image of safety and love her family believed surrounded her. A relationship that would pull her into a storm of lies, betrayal, and violence, ending in a way no one could have imagined. And that secret was about to cost her everything. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and get comfortable, because this is a true crime story you won't forget. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments below, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts as we go. Your input is a vital part of this conversation. Welcome to 24/7 True Crime Chronicles, where every story we tell is based on real events. Kindly support us by subscribing to the channel and turning on the notification bell so you never miss any of our newest stories. Now, let's continue the story. Kanye's family knew her as their bright, ambitious girl. But what they didn't know was that, quietly, she had become entangled in a relationship that was anything but simple. Behind her laughter, behind her beauty school dreams and career plans, there was a connection she had kept in the shadows. The man's name was Sultan Sharif. He wasn't a classmate or a peer or even someone close in age. He was more than 30 years older than Kanye. And not only was he older, he was married. For Kanye, the relationship had started years earlier, when she was still a teenager. To her, it may have felt like attention, validation, maybe even love. But in reality, the balance of power was never equal. She was young, vulnerable, and still figuring out who she was. He was a man with decades of experience, responsibilities, and secrets he needed to protect. To the outside world, Sultan presented himself as a family man, a husband, a man who should have been focused on the life he had built at home. But in the shadows, he lived a double life. One where he pursued a young woman who still had her whole future ahead of her. The secrecy defined everything. Their meetings were quiet, hidden away from the people who loved Kanye most. And at first, she may have believed it was a bond she could trust, something she could hold on to. But over time, that secrecy began to weigh on her. The cracks started to show. Because no matter how carefully you try to hide something, the truth has a way of forcing its way to the surface. Not long before her death, Kanye reached a breaking point. She had started contacting Sultan's wife. Maybe it was frustration, maybe it was her way of demanding that the relationship not stay in the shadows forever. Maybe she simply wanted the truth out in the open. But for Sultan, it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. He panicked. His entire carefully constructed image was now at risk. The walls of secrecy he had built for years were suddenly collapsing. And instead of taking responsibility, instead of owning up to what he had done, he lashed out in fear. A week before Kanye's murder, Sultan actually reached out to her mother. Imagine that for a moment, a grown man in his 50s calling the mother of the young woman he was secretly seeing. In that call, he claimed he wanted to end things. He said, "I want to be done messing with your daughter." But his words weren't filled with guilt or remorse. They were laced with fear. He admitted that Kanye had been reaching out to his wife. For Kanye, perhaps this was her attempt to stop hiding, to stop being silenced. For Sultan, it meant something else entirely. It meant exposure. It meant his double life could no longer be kept secret. And it made Kanye a threat. A dangerous tension now hung in the air between them. On one side, a young woman determined to live freely, no longer willing to be kept in the shadows. On the other, an older man desperate to protect his image, his marriage, and the lies he had spun for years. The stage was set. Two lives colliding in a way that could only end in disaster. And soon, it would. Because just days later, Kanye would leave her home for the very last time, sending her mother a cheerful smiley face in what would unknowingly be her final message. And the man waiting for her that morning was Sultan Sharif. September 24th, 2022 began like any other day for 20-year-old Kanye Brunson. The morning carried no warning signs, no hint of the nightmare that was about to unfold. She woke up, got ready, and left her Milwaukee home. Before she walked out the door, she sent her mother a simple text message, a smiley face, a tiny gesture of love, a symbol of the bond between mother and daughter. It was casual. It was warm. And tragically, it would be the last message her mom would ever receive from her. Kanye was heading to meet Sultan Sharif, the older, married man she had been secretly involved with for years. For her, it might have felt like another tense encounter, maybe even a chance to find clarity in a relationship that had grown toxic. For him, it was something far darker. As the hours passed, her family expected her to come back, maybe call, maybe text again. But silence followed. The smiley face was the final sign of life. Her mother would later say she knew, deep down, when police called about Kanye's abandoned car, that something terrible had happened. But what truly happened in those hours was even more chilling than anyone could imagine. Not long after she met with Sultan, a witness, one of his own friends, made a desperate call to 911. He reported that he had seen Sultan on top of Kanye in his car. From a distance, it looked violent. And then came the sound no one can forget, Kanye's own voice screaming for help. She was yelling, "He cut my throat." She was begging for someone to save her. That friend, horrified, immediately phoned the police. But by the time officers arrived in the area, Sultan and Kanye were gone. The chance to intervene, to rescue her in that moment, slipped through their fingers. Hours later, the full horror of what had happened came to light. In an alley near Keefe Avenue and Palmer Street, someone made a devastating discovery. There, hidden away from the world, was Kanye's body. The scene was brutal, almost unthinkable. She had been tied, she had been shot, and in a final, horrific attempt to erase the crime, her body had been set on fire. It wasn't just murder. It was destruction. It was cruelty layered on top of violence. Sultan hadn't just taken her life. He had tried to erase her from existence. News of her death spread quickly. For her family, the world shattered. Their daughter, the one who lit up every room, the one who dreamed of helping others, had been found discarded in the most brutal way possible. For her community, it was a wave of grief and shock. For investigators, it was the start of a case that would unravel lie after lie, until the full, ugly truth was laid bare. But in those first hours, questions swirled. How could this happen in broad daylight? Why would Sultan's own friend witness such a terrifying moment, yet Kanye still end up dead? And who else knew the truth and was helping hide it?
Called and told me her car was found. And I knew then, at that point, like, something happened to her. And they think that they're gonna be out here and live their normal life after they, helped with it.
It's some comfort to know that, we have the suspects and, they are being charged. But yet and still with the court system, kind of headache, pushing stuff back, rescheduling everything. And, that's what's keeping, us from not having all the peace we want.
Because as detectives began their investigation, they quickly realized Sultan was not the only one tangled in this web. And the more they pulled on the strings of his story, the more it unraveled into something bigger than anyone expected. When detectives arrived at the alley that night, the crime scene told them one thing clearly. This wasn't random. This was personal, brutal, calculated. Someone had gone to great lengths not just to end Kanye's life, but to destroy evidence of what had happened. And investigators didn't have to look far before a name surfaced again and again. Sultan Sharif. Almost immediately, his story didn't add up. He insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. His wife even backed him, telling investigators he had been home with her that night. To some, it sounded like a tight alibi. But detectives weren't convinced. They started digging, pulling surveillance footage, checking cell phone records, retracing Kanye's last steps. And quickly, the lies began to crack. Video surveillance placed Sultan in areas he swore he hadn't been. Phone data showed calls and movements that contradicted his story. And his wife's alibi? It collapsed under the weight of evidence. She hadn't been telling the truth. She had tried to shield him, but the facts didn't lie. And then came the most damning piece. The 911 call from Sultan's own friend, the one who had seen him on top of Kanye as she screamed that he had cut her throat. That single call turned the case from suspicion into certainty. But Sultan hadn't acted alone. Investigators soon learned that after the killing, he turned to someone close to him for help, his own brother-in-law, Johnny Allen Hopgood. According to prosecutors, Hopgood helped Sultan in the aftermath, aiding in the attempt to burn Kanye's body, trying to destroy what little remained of the truth. For detectives, this was no longer the story of one man's violence. It was a wider circle of lies and complicity. By October 2022, prosecutors had enough evidence to bring the case to court. Sultan Sharif was charged with first-degree intentional homicide and mutilating a corpse, some of the most serious charges possible under Wisconsin law. Hopgood, meanwhile, faced charges of mutilating a corpse and aiding a felon. For Kanye's family, it was a step toward justice, but it didn't bring peace. Each court hearing, each headline, each new detail in the investigation reopened the wound of what they had lost. Her mother said she couldn't rest until the truth was fully exposed and those responsible were held accountable. But justice is rarely straightforward. And in this case, what unfolded next inside the courtroom would leave the family stunned. Because not every person involved would face the punishment they expected. And one decision by prosecutors would feel, to Kanye's loved ones, like a betrayal almost as cruel as the crime itself. As the investigation transitioned into the courtroom, the grief that had weighed on Kanye's family now collided with the slow, grinding process of justice. They showed up to hearings. They listened to motions. They waited through delays. Every step dragged the wound open again. But they refused to look away. For prosecutors, the case against Sultan Sharif seemed strong. Witness testimony, phone records, surveillance footage, and the chilling 911 call pointed directly at him. He had motive, opportunity, and a desperate reason to silence Kanye. On paper, it was overwhelming. But Sultan wasn't the only one sitting under the court's scrutiny. His brother-in-law, Johnny Allen Hopgood, also faced serious charges. Authorities believed he had helped Sultan after the killing, aiding in burning Kanye's body to cover up the crime. His role may not have been pulling the trigger, but it was dark enough. He had helped destroy evidence, helped erase the truth. Kanye's family braced themselves for the trials ahead. They wanted justice in its full form, accountability for everyone who had played a part in her death and the desecration of her body. But then, something happened that left them stunned. In June of 2023, Hopgood, the man accused of helping burn her remains, struck a deal. Instead of standing trial for mutilating a corpse and aiding a felon, he pleaded guilty to a much lesser charge, resisting and obstructing an officer. A charge that carried far lighter consequences. A charge that felt, in the eyes of Kanye's family, like a slap on the wrist. Her loved ones were devastated. How could a man accused of helping conceal such a brutal crime walk away with so little accountability? To them, it felt like justice had slipped through their fingers yet again. For Kanye's mother, it was almost unbearable. Her daughter's suffering reduced to a plea deal that didn't match the gravity of what had been done. But while Hopgood walked away with less, Sultan's fate was still to be decided, and his day in court would bring a very different outcome. In December 2023, the trial began. The courtroom filled with tension as prosecutors laid out their case. They painted a picture of a man desperate to protect his secret double life. A man who chose violence over truth. A man who had silenced a young woman when she threatened to expose him. The evidence was chilling. Jurors heard about the 911 call, where Sultan's own friend described seeing Kanye fighting for her life. They saw the surveillance footage that contradicted his alibi. They learned how even his wife had initially lied to protect him, only to have those lies fall apart under investigation. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. And when it came time for the jury to decide, the verdict was swift and decisive. Guilty on all counts. Sultan Sharif was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide and mutilating a corpse as a party to a crime. On February 21st, 2024, the sentence was handed down. The judge imposed the harshest penalty possible, life in prison for the murder, plus 12 additional years for the mutilation of Kanye's body. Sultan would never walk free again. For Kanye's family, it was a moment of justice, but not of peace. Her mother wept as she spoke about the emptiness that no sentence could ever fill. Her father said the pain would never leave. Her stepfather remembered her laughter, the way she could light up a room, and said the silence she left behind was unbearable. Justice on paper did not erase grief in reality. And yet, as the gavel came down, one thing was certain: the man who had stolen Kanye's life would never again have the chance to hurt anyone else. But outside the courtroom, a bigger truth remained. One that stretched beyond Sultan's guilt. Because Kanye's story wasn't just about one man's violence. It was about how secrets destroy, how lies pile up, and how the vulnerable are too often left unprotected. And for her family, the battle didn't end with a guilty verdict. It continued in vigils, in memorials, in the way they kept her name alive. Because while the justice system had given them a sentence, it could never give them what they wanted most: Kanye back. When the trial ended and the judge's gavel struck, the courtroom closed its doors. For many, that was the end of the story. But for Kanye's family, it was only the beginning of a new kind of struggle, one that no sentence could ever solve. Because justice in the legal sense had been served. Sultan Sharif would spend the rest of his life behind bars, with 12 extra years added to make certain he would never walk free. But the reality of grief is that no amount of prison time can fill the empty seat at the dinner table. No sentence can replace a hug, a laugh, or a smile that will never come again. Kanye's mother, Jennifer, spoke openly about the weight of that pain. She described her daughter as her best friend, her confidant, the one she never imagined she would have to bury. Her words carried the raw truth of what it means to lose a child to violence. She was everything to me. And this is the most hurtful feeling. Her stepfather remembered her laughter, how even in the hardest of times, she had a way of making everyone feel lighter. Her father, too, reflected on her determination, her drive to accomplish big things even at such a young age. For her grandmother, the grief came with flashes of memory, her vibrancy, her energy, the way she drew people in. Each of them carried their own piece of her, but together they shared the unbearable reality of her absence. The community felt it too. In the months after her death, Milwaukee was shaken. People gathered at vigils, lighting candles, releasing balloons into the night sky. Each balloon carried with it a prayer, a wish, or a memory of Kanye. Her loved ones spoke her name aloud, refusing to let the world forget her. 1 year later, as the anniversary of her death arrived, the pain had not softened. Her family stood together again, surrounded by friends and supporters, holding on to each other as they remembered her. They spoke about the same grief that lingered, the same questions that still haunted them. But they also spoke about strength, about the importance of holding each other up when life tries to break you down. Her case became more than just a headline. It became a reminder of the dangers hidden in secrecy, of how power imbalances and manipulation can turn deadly. It was also a reminder of how women, especially young women of color, too often become victims in silence, their stories overlooked or forgotten. But Kanye's story would not be forgotten. It was featured in podcasts, remembered in community events, and spoken about by advocates who wanted the world to see her not just as a victim, but as a young woman full of life, ambition, and love. For her family, keeping her memory alive is an ongoing act of love. They fight so that her name is not just tied to the brutality of her death, but also to the brightness of her life. Her smile, her dreams, the way she made others feel. And so, even as they continue to grieve, they carry a message. A message about the need to protect the vulnerable, to speak up when danger lurks in the shadows, and to never ignore the signs of manipulation and secrecy that too often end in tragedy. Because Kanye was not just a statistic, she was not just a headline, she was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a dreamer, a young woman who deserved to grow old, to chase her ambitions, to build a family, to laugh and love without fear. Her story is heartbreaking, but it is also a call for justice beyond the courtroom, a call for awareness, a call for change. And as her family has shown, love does not end with death. It continues in memory, in the fight for justice, and in the way her story now lives on. Not just in Milwaukee, but everywhere her name is spoken. Kanye Brunson's life was stolen, but her light still shines.